Welcome to today's hearing. We're going to hear further today from Mr. Ray Bailey of Harley. So could you ask Mr. Bailey to come in, please? Good morning, Mr. Bailey.
Morning.
Take your time. All right?
Yes, thank
Ready to continue?
Yes.
Good. Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Bailey.
Morning.
I'm going to ask you some questions next about CWCT guidance. Were you aware at the time of your involvement in the Grenfell Tower project of guidance notes produced by CWCT?
Yes.
Can I ask you to look at CWCT 5019? This is something called Technical Note 73, produced by the CWCT in 2011, March 2011. Have you ever seen this document before, do you think?
Yes, I have.
You have. When do you think you had seen it before?
It was shown to me, I think, a couple of years ago.
After the Grenfell Tower
Yes.
fire. Had you seen it at the time of your involvement in the project?
I don't think I had, no.
You don't think you had? Do you think anybody else within Harley had?
Yes, I'm sure they would have done.
Who was that, do you think?
I think Mark Stapley. What day did this come
March
out?
2011.
Or Graham Hackley, Mark Stapley would have seen it.
What about Daniel Anketell-Jones?
He may have seen it.
Right, we can ask him about that. Was there a system within Harley for disseminating guidance documents such as these to the professionals involved in particular projects?
Mark Stapley was the operations director and chief designer. So he would, if it was important information, he would disseminate it to his design team.
Right. I mean, did you proceed on the assumption that whoever was doing detailed design on a cladding package would have seen documents such as this?
Yes.
Yes. Let's see how we go, given that you, I think, are telling us you weren't familiar with its detail. If you look at the summary in italics to the guidance note, it says, curtain walls are normally used for areas of the building envelope that are not required to be fire resisting, but they still require appropriate detailing to limit the spread of fire. This technical note reviews the aspects relating to fire performance that generally need to be considered in the design of facades that are not required to be fire resisting. Where the fire is required to be fire resisting, additional requirements will apply. Was that your understanding in general terms as a matter of principle?
Yes.
Yes. What was your understanding between of the distinction between fire resistance of curtain walling compared with fire resistance of rain screen cladding?
I think they're the same.
The same. What did you, or what would you understand by the phrase, where the facade is required to be fire resisting, additional requirements will apply?
That would apply if it was protecting a walkway or a means of escape, and it would be fire-resistant glazing.
What about buildings over 18 metres?
I think there's there's two sort of sides to this. Fire-resisting curtain wall protects the one side of the wall from the other. So if you have a fire on one side, you can walk down the other side, and that is a physical fire barrier between the fire. So that's fire resisting. What we're talking about here is whether a curtain wall or a cladding will be destroyed in a fire, and they're two different things. Because a curtain wall is glass, which will break in a fire, and they're made of aluminium, which will melt during the course of a fire.
Right. Let's look further down the page then. On the left-hand side, under Introduction, the third paragraph on the left, under that heading, says the main requirement, do you see that?
Yes.
The main requirement for curtain walls that are not required to provide fire resistance is the provision of fire stopping between the external wall and compartment floors and walls. In some situations, there may also be a requirement to provide fire protection to brackets supporting the wall and limit the combustibility of materials used in the wall. And then it goes on. Rain screen walls are additionally required to limit the spread of fire in the rain screen cavity. Did you understand that guidance, even though you hadn't read it, to be
Yes.
applicable at the time?
Yes.
Yes. Now, I want to move to questions about Class Naught, if I can, and what you understood about Class Naught and the concept of limited combustibility. That's the next topic. Now, the technical note here, if you look at the bottom of page 1 and over onto page 2, says, at the very bottom on the right, in England and Wales and Northern Ireland, materials may be described as non-combustible, of limited combustibility, or Class Naught, using definitions given in ADB. Materials may also be classified as Class 1, 2, 3, or 4 in accordance with BS 476, Parts 6 and 7. Equivalent European classifications are also used. Were you familiar with Class Naught as a classification for building materials at the time?
Yes.
What did you consider Class Naught to mean?
It was a product that's difficult to ignite, and if you take the source of flame away from it, it won't continue to burn.
What was the significance of a material having a Class Naught certification, did you think?
That it was safe to use on a building.
Safe to use on any building
Over 18 metres.
over 18 metres. Safe to use on any building over 18 metres in any part of that building?
Yes.
Was it a phrase or expression, Class Naught, used regularly in the construction industry at the time?
Yes.
Had you yourself undertaken any training or CPD in relation to the testing of building products and their different classifications, fire classifications?
No.
Do you or did you consider yourself as under a duty to educate yourself as to these different fire classifications that existed at the time of your involvement?
No.
As a specialist cladding subcontractor, why were you not under that duty, did you think?
As a specialist subcontractor, there is a lot of things that we're involved with. Fire being one of them. We're not fire experts.
So, is the gist of that answer, so I'm clear, that even though Harley was a specialist cladding subcontractor, it was not concerned with the fire classifications of the products and materials it was using in its envelopes it was applying to buildings?
No, that's not what I said. We supply the material that actually has the correct classification to be used.
Yes.
And you're correct, we haven't, I haven't investigated all the tests that are required to give the material their particular classification.
You see, fire classification is to do with fire safety and the saving and protection of life. And my question is really a simple one, which is why, as a specialist cladding subcontractor, at the time of the Grenfell Tower project, Harley wasn't concerned to educate itself as to the nature of these fire classifications.
I'm sorry, I'm not. No, we haven't educated ourselves on the tests that are used to provide materials with their classification.
No, I know, and I'm just keen to know why that is.
Well, because the materials come classified to a standard, we didn't necessarily understand exactly what the test is.
Why is that?
I don't know.
Were you aware of a distinction between class naught as a concept and limited combustibility as a concept?
Yes.
What was your understanding of that difference at the time of the Grenfell Tower project?
Well, I think Class O, generally in parts 6 and 7, refers to it's tested for the surface spread of flame and propagation. And there's another test that then makes the material limited combustibility.
So, does that answer tell us that you understood that they were separate concepts, subject to separate tests?
I think there are slightly different concepts with additional tests.
All right. What was your understanding of how class naught and limited combustibility related to one another?
There's an additional test, which I can tell you now is BS 476 part 11.
You say you can tell me now.
I knew there was
Could you
another
have told
test.
me that in 2013?
I would have said there's another test. I wouldn't know what it is.
Sorry. You say with great specificity, BS 476 part 11. Was that something that you were aware of in 2013?
No, I knew there was another test within BS 476. I didn't know which one it was. I've subsequently looked at it, and it's part 11.
Yes, I see. It's clear from this technical note that class naught and limited combustibility were different. Did you understand that they were different at the time?
Yes.
Did you understand at the time that they weren't interchangeable concepts?
Actually, they are.
They're interchangeable, are they?
Well, so then also, if you look at Table 8 in Appendix A, it actually says Class O, and then the European equivalent, which is the UK Class O, is described as non-combustible, limited combustibility, or a composite that complies with Section 13B. So Class O covers all of those three conditions.
Your explanation just now, which is technical and detailed, is that something that you're telling us as a result of researches and learning that you've undertaken after the fire? Or is this something you could have told me if I was asking you these questions in 2013?
No, this is what I know now,
Right.
But it also goes to explain, I think, part of the confusion that is across the industry with Class O and limited combustibility.
Well, let me put it perhaps more simply. As at the time of your involvement in the Grenfell Tower project, spanning the years of your involvement, did you think that the concept of class naught was interchangeable with the concept of limited combustibility?
I actually thought that Class O throughout meant that it had passed the additional test, so that actually meant it was of limited combustibility.
Let's see how we get on then. Can I ask you to look at approved document B, which is at CLG 50224, and let's go to page 122, please. Now this and I'd like you to look at paragraph 13, which says, I'll read it to you, just so as to familiarise yourself with it. The highest national product performance classification for lining materials is class 0. So that's lining materials is class 0. This is achieved if a material or the surface of a composite product is either A, composed throughout of materials of limited combustibility, or B, a class 1 material which has a fire propagation index 1, or I think it is, of more than 12 and a subindex I1 of not more than 6. Note, class 0 is not a classification identified in any British standard test. Was it your understanding that class 0 was a classification that was primarily concerned with lining materials?
No.
So you thought that, is this right, that it had relevance other than in respect of lining materials?
Yes.
Did you consider that it had any relevance other than in respect of the external surface of a product?
No. Sorry, let me just rephrase. If it's class O for surface spread of flame, it's on the outside. If it's throughout, I took that to mean it was of limited combustibility.
Well, we can read the words in paragraph 13, and I'm just seeking to get your understanding at the time, and maybe that's difficult now to put yourself back in that position. I am seeking your contemporaneous understanding. And I'm just trying to understand what you thought at the time. Let me try it differently. Did you understand at the time that if it was of limited combustibility, it would be class 0, and if it was class 0, then it would be of limited combustibility?
No, there's a difference.
And what was that difference in your mind at the time?
There was an additional test. So if it's, because class O covers both, to be limited combustibility, there's an additional test, and I told you at the time I didn't know exactly what that test was. I know what it is now, and that is the difference. So if it's class O throughout, it means it's of limited combustibility. If it's class O, that relates only to the surface spread of flame.
I don't understand what you mean by the reference to class O throughout.
So that's a phrase that was used by Celetex.
Right.
In fact, not only
we'll come to that documentation later on. Let me try and put it to you. Do you accept that on paragraph 13, which is, as we can see, to do with lining materials, something, a product, is class 0 if it's composed throughout of materials of limited combustibility, but, and ignore B for the moment, not the other way round. In other words, just because it is composed of materials of limited combustibility, it's not necessarily class 0. Sorry, I've got that the wrong way around myself. Just because it is class 0, then it's not necessarily of limited combustibility throughout.
I think, as I said yesterday, at the time of Grenfell, I had prior to it, I read through this and I wasn't didn't have the detailed knowledge of this looking at it now. But again, reading this is achieved if a material, or the surface of the material of a composite product, is composed throughout materials of limited combustibility. Does that read that the surface material is composed throughout of limited combustibility?
Well, you're asking a question of me, and maybe is that a question you asked yourself at the time?
No, I'm reading this now, and that's. It doesn't seem to me to be crystal clear.
Well, let's see how we go. Can I ask you to look at your statement, please, at page 29? paragraph 114.
Yes, sir.
You say there, halfway down, Cooltherm K15 is described in its BBA certificate. You see that?
Yes.
As being class 0. Whilst the test in approved document B, paragraph 12.7, is one of limited combustibility, it was assumed that as the product was described as class 0 in respect of behaviour in relation to fire, it was compliant with paragraph 12.7 and suitable for buildings over 18 metres. Now, that's your statement. Mm-hmm. Are you saying there that you thought at the time that a class 0 product met the definition of limited combustibility?
Yes.
How did you come to that conclusion?
I think this was also described as class O throughout.
Where's that?
No, it doesn't say that. It should have said described as class O throughout. We need to check the.
Well, we may come to the certificate later on. But it looks from this, that at the time, you were assuming that just if something was class 0, it was therefore of limited combustibility.
I think if it's class O throughout, yes.
And I'm really just asking you how you came to that conclusion.
Because it wasn't just the surface that was class O.
Where do you get the concept of class 0 throughout from, as opposed to limited combustibility throughout?
I think this is a confusion.
Whose confusion?
Well, I think mine, and I think it's quite widespread throughout the industry.
At the time, and I think the answer is yes, given what you told us just shortly a few moments ago this morning, did you know what tests have to be carried out to meet the definition of limited combustibility, as opposed to class 0?
Yes, there were the two for class 0, 6 and 7, which is quite, and the additional test is part 11.
Yes. Now, you've given us the numbers this morning. I mean, did you know the numbers at the time? I think
it was 6 and 7, yes.
You knew 6 and 7, but not 11.
I didn't know which it was.
Right, but you knew there were different tests.
I knew it was an additional test, yes.
An additional test. All right. We looked at Appendix A, paragraph 13 a moment ago in approved document B, which referred to linings.
Yes.
We can get back to it if you like. But was that the source of your thinking at the time, that class 0 equaled limited combustibility?
Well, given what I've explained, there is a difference. It's an additional test.
Yes. But just focusing on paragraph, perhaps we should look back at it. CLG 50224, page 122. So I just want to understand precisely the basis of your thinking at the time. We've read it, and we can see what it says there. And I just want to focus on A. So class 0 is achieved if a material or the surface of a composite product is either composed throughout of materials of limited combustibility. If you read it properly, it says that class 0 will be met for lining products if the product is of limited combustibility throughout. But it doesn't say that vice versa. It doesn't say that it will be of limited combustibility if it's class 0 throughout, does it?
No, it doesn't say that.
In fact, it's quite clear, I would suggest to you, what it's saying.
Yes.
And if we look on at page, just on tests, at page 132 of the same document, this is table A7, you can see there, and this is the use and definitions of materials of limited combustibility. You can see there, under item 8, which is telling you about insulation material in external wall construction referred to in paragraph 12.7, that it can be any of the materials in A, B, or C above, and you can see what those are, non-combustible, and then something of a requisite density, which tested to 47611 doesn't exceed certain temperatures, and C is to do with thickness, and then D, any material of density less than 300 kilograms per cubic meter, which when tested to B47611 doesn't flame for more than 10 seconds, etc. There's nothing in there about being an additional test, and I'm suggesting to you on this that 47611 was a completely separate standalone test for limited combustibility. It wasn't additional to 4766 or 4767. Now, do you accept that?
Yes, I accept. I must be well.
And therefore, your understanding, if you told us at the time that 47611 was additional to 4766 and 4767, was wrong.
It appears that it was.
Did Harley ever train or educate any of its employees as to the distinction between a Class 0 product and a product of limited combustibility?
We sent our technical manager on the CWCT course, and he has a master's degree. At the time, the chap was Graham Hackley. And his job when he came back was to disseminate knowledge to the rest of the team.
Did Mr. Hackley, when he came back, ever sit Harley employees down, such as yourself, and explain the difference, as he understood it, between Class 0 and limited combustibility?
He didn't sit down and explain that to me, but with the use of Kingspan, when that product was first brought to market after, or started to be used when Part L was changed, he signed off on using Kingspan as a product in exactly the same way that we've subsequently used Celetex.
Signed it off as a product for use on what building?
Wayland's house, a number of buildings. So the architect will specify Kingspan. Graham looked at it, looked at this and said, yes, that's the product you can use. It's safe to use it.
Was any of the buildings on which Graham Hackley signed off, as you put it, the use of Kingspan K15 Cooltherm, I think that's the product you're referring
yes.
to, a high-rise building in excess of 18 metres?
Yes.
Which one? It was Wayland's house, one of those?
Wayland's house is one of those.
And when was this sign-off?
2012.
2012. Well, we may revisit that. Can I move on? Can I ask you to go to page 20 of your statement, paragraph 179? You say at paragraph 79 there, in terms of the materials used in the building envelope, these were all materials manufactured by trusted, well-known, multi-billion-pound global companies. The Rainabond ACM had been used by Harley and many other cladding companies for many years. We had no reason to doubt its Class 0 rating. The Celetex, whilst a relatively new product, was manufactured by a well-known, reputable manufacturer. It had been in use for some years and had become widely used after the introduction of Part L and the drive to improve U values. It was clearly sold as being suitable for buildings over 18 metres and described as Class 0 in its literature. We relied on the information given to us by these manufacturers. Would it be fair to say that your assumption, which we've been discussing this morning and appears to be wrong, about Class 0 was applied to the Celetex insulation product as well?
It was.
Yeah. Now, returning to the technical note, if I may, which is CWCT 5019 at page 4, I'd like pages 4 and 5 to be put up together, please. Right at the very bottom of page 5, you can see regulations, and then over to the top of page 6. For rain screen walls, ADB requires that cavity barriers are provided. You see that? Mm-hmm. And then it says at the top of page 5, to close the edges of cavities, including around window openings. And then next bullet point, at the junction of the wall with a compartment wall or floor. Just pausing there, did you know that the guidance drew specific attention to cavity barriers around window openings?
Yes.
Did your staff?
Yes.
Let's look at page 6, please, then, moving on with it, under the heading of use of combustible materials. Material. I'd just like to look with you, please, at the second paragraph there, and it says, to satisfy the recommendations in ADB, insulation and filler materials in walls of a building with a floor more than 18 metres above ground level are required to be of limited combustibility. Just pausing there, at the time of the Grenfell Tower project, were you aware of the requirement of insulation to be of limited combustibility?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, the guide goes on to say, above the heading alternative approaches, just at the bottom, the only commonly used insulation material that will satisfy the definition of limited combustibility is mineral wool. It is sometimes argued that thermoset insulation materials with non-combustible facings may be regarded as satisfying the requirement, noting that their decomposition in fire will release smoke. It's right, I think, that Grenfell Tower did not use a mineral wool insulation material, did it?
It didn't.
And there's nothing here to say that if the material or product is Class 0, then that will satisfy the requirement, is there?
No, that goes on to... I think we come back to the term Class O throughout, which is being used by the, which is to the belief that the material was a limited combustibility.
Well, that's based on your error, that Class 0 throughout.
Yes.
That there was such a thing as Class 0 throughout, which equaled limited combustibility,
yes,
as opposed to limited combustibility throughout, which equaled Class 0.
Could you repeat
yes,
that?
That's what you've just told us, which is the term Class 0 throughout, is an erroneous term, because in fact what you are doing is equating limited combustibility throughout with Class 0, which would be correct, with Class 0 throughout with limited combustibility, which would be incorrect, as we've just established earlier.
Okay.
Do you accept that? That the source of your assumption is as I have put to you?
Yes.
Looking at the CWCT Technical Note 73, and particularly this part about insulation, were you aware of the argument at the time that thermoset insulations might or may be regarded as satisfying the definition of limited combustibility?
Yes, that's why the Kingspan was signed off.
And is it right that, in fact, the only commonly used insulation that would satisfy... Let me start the question again. Did you understand at the time that the only commonly used insulation material that would satisfy the definition of limited combustibility is mineral wool?
No, at the time, the Kingspan had become accepted in the industry as a product that was suitable for use over 18 metres. Prior to 2009, every project we did had rock wool on it.
I think also Chalcott's had rock wool, didn't it?
Yes, that was a 2000. We did that in 2006 to 2010.
That's right. But Ferrier Point,
That had rock wool.
the rock wool as well. That was later, wasn't it?
That was 2012.
Yes. And I think Ferrier Point was the most recent high-rise overcladding job that you had done. Is this right? Prior to the Grenfell Tower job?
Probably.
Yeah. Can I ask you then to look at the top of the right-hand column on this self-same page 6 in this note, which says, where testing is carried out in accordance with BS 8414, the test applies to the complete cladding system, including insulation, rain screen, flashings, and cavity barriers. Changing any of these components may affect the ability of the wall to resist the spread of fire. At the time, did you appreciate, as a matter of principle at least, that the compliance of a cladding system with approved document B, summarised, we would say, by this guidance note, required a contractor to consider all of the components of a particular cladding system against a test rig which had successfully passed the BS 8414 test?
Yes.
You did understand that?
Mm-hmm.
And would you accept that it would follow that at the time you understood that if the insulation used on any tower block, but let's take Grenfell, Celetex RS5000 and Cooltherm K15 were not in fact materials of limited combustibility, and we'll come back to them specifically later, you understood that their use on Grenfell Tower as a building over 18 metres could only have complied with approved document B, summarised here, where it had either passed a full-scale BS 8414 test as part of the same cladding system used, or there was a desktop study or a holistic engineering report to support its use.
Well, as I explained, we were comfortable with the Celetex for two reasons. The first, the understanding of Class O throughout meant it was of limited combustibility, which we've discussed. Secondly, in addition to that, it had a passed an 8414 test, and we sent the details of the cladding system that we were using to Celetex for them to approve. It says changing any of the comments may affect the ability for the wall to resist the spread of fire. But we're asking Celetex, this is what we're using, are you happy with this? And they were.
Just in terms of the principles, I'm going to come back to the facts later, but just in terms of the general applicable principles, and I'm trying to get your understanding of those, I think you're telling us, but please correct me if I'm wrong about that, that there were, you understood at the time there were a number of routes to compliance for the purposes of limited combustibility, either that the material was of limited combustibility or it had passed a full-scale BS 8414 test.
Yes.
Or there was a desktop study, or a holistic engineering report.
Yes.
I've given you 4 options there. I'm trying to summarise this because there's a lot of material we could look at. But is that how you understood it at the time?
Yes.
Yes. Which route to compliance for limited combustibility did you think was being followed on the Grenfell Tower project?
I thought we were covered in 2 ways. And our thoughts were the material was of limited combustibility. And if that's incorrect, we accept that. In addition, there was a BS84 test. It was a material that had a whole series of tests. It was a fantastic product. On the certificate, we saw that it said it had been tested with a different facing material. We sent our details to Celetex to get them to sign off that it was safe. So I suppose we're saying we believed that Celetex had carried out a study on it.
You say we sent our details to Celetex to get them to sign off that it was safe.
Yeah.
Does that tell us that you were...
Well, so that may be that was a poor choice of words to confirm that it was they were happy for us to use it in that situation.
So whichever choice of words you take, does it come to this, that you were delegating the sign-off, or confirmation, if you like, of the safety of this product to the very person who had made it and was selling it to you?
Yeah, we wanted Celetex confirmation that they were happy for us to use it.
Was it not up to Harley to satisfy itself that it was safe to use by making the appropriate investigations?
Well, we made the investigations with the manufacturer.
Was there any reason why you couldn't ask either Studio E or Exova, who had been involved in this project and remained involved in this project, to undertake the investigations of the fire safety nature of this product?
Well, the product was specified by Studio E. Exova were their fire consultant, so by the time the design was passed down to us, the prescriptive design was passed down to us, Celetex was named, we were doing our own backup check to stuff that had already been signed off by them. So we did our own checks and took all proper and necessary means, in our view, to confirm that what they'd specified for us was correct.
Well, you say that the product was specified by Studio E and may be correct in relation to FR 5000, but what about when it changed to RS 5000?
When it changed to RS 5000, we passed the information back to Studio E.
Did you?
Yeah, we told them this is the product Celetex, and I think we've confirmed since they actually are the same product, just marketed differently.
Well, did you ask Studio E to investigate the fire safety nature of this new product or newly branded product, RS 5000?
I'm not sure that we asked them to do that.
No. What about Kingspan Cool Therm K15? That wasn't specified at all by Studio E, was it?
No.
No. So how did, in the absence of your own architect knowing, how did you undertake any checks to see whether or not that was fire safe?
Well, because it had been signed off as fire safe previously by our technical manager on previous projects.
Some years before?
Yes.
And what, did you undertake any checks to see whether or not the product had changed in any way in those years?
No, although it is interesting that there is a subsequent BBA certificate for Kingspan that came out after we had started Grenfell. that actually changed its performance criteria. Now that's, and this, I can't understand how you can have a product with the same name change its composition, or not change its composition, have it retested and carry on selling it when its performance has been completely downgraded.
That's something you know now, but it's not something you knew at the time, is that right?
It's not something that we knew at the time, not something that was advertised. And if they'd called it something different, Kingspan K10, is that in K15 is no longer available, it would have alerted everyone there had been a change.
Yeah, and had checks and investigations been carried out, Harley would have found that out.
At the time that we actually got the K15, I don't think the BA certificate had changed.
What about the product?
No, they're still selling Kingspan K15. There was no change in name of the product. And why would you be alerted if they're selling the same stuff?
And we'll come to K15 later on, but just for the present purposes, did you think that K15 was a material of limited combustibility?
Okay, from what had been sold before, yes.
Or perhaps, and did you think that it had passed an 8414 test?
Kingspan has passed 8414 test, yes.
So it has?
It has.
As a fact? Do you know that, do you?
Yes, I know that for sure now.
How do you know that?
I've seen in the past year or so, I've seen a number of tests with Kingspan K15.
Right. Let's then turn to a different topic, which is Renebond and the BBA certificate. We talked to some extent yesterday about this, Mr. Bailey. Can I start with some evidence or some proposed evidence from Mr. Werler of Arconic? I'd like you to see his statement, please. It's MET 3053190. And I'd like you to go to page 20. And at paragraph 68, he says, on the 7th of November 2013, the CSTB, which is the French testing system organisation, informed Philippe that the first SBI tests had been completed on the samples sent and that the rivet sample had indicated behaviour equivalent to a C classification on the one sample, and that the test on the cassette sample had been stopped due to a flashover, so the best achievable classification for that variant would be an E using an ignitability test. Just pausing there. It appears from this excerpt from his statement that a cassette system was significantly more combustible compared with a riveted system. And I'm suggesting to you that that's effectively what that says. My question is, were you aware of that at the time of your involvement with the Grenfell Tower project?
Absolutely not.
Did anybody from Alcoa or Arconic tell you about the testing that had been conducted by the CSTB and the ratings which had been achieved on flat panels and cassettes respectively?
Absolutely not.
What about Jeff Blades of CEP? Did he tell you that a cassette had achieved an E?
Absolutely not.
Or that there had been a flashover during the test?
No.
Did you consider, in general terms, and we'll look at the certificate in a moment, but did you consider in general terms whether there was a distinction between the two methods of fixing of Renebond PE ACM so far as regards fire safety or classification?
No.
Did you ever make any investigations yourself, or anybody else at Harley, into how the fixing method might affect fire performance?
No, on the BBA certificate it shows both as being conform to CASA.
It does, and we'll come to that in a moment. Let's just go on with Mr. Werler's statement. Can I ask you to go to page 21, please, paragraph 70? He says in the first two sentences at the top of the page, the next EN 13501 testing that I organised on Rainer Bond 55 PE was later in 2014. It had become clear from discussions within AAP SAS and the wider market that there was a desire to again have separate classification reports for the PE rivet and cassette variants to more accurately reflect the classifications that each had in practice obtained. Now, this is 2014. Were you aware at that time, or by that time, of any desire in the wider market, as he calls it, to have different classification reports for the PE rivet and the cassette variant, respectively?
No.
Were you aware that Alcoa, as they were then called, was sending their cassettes off for retesting?
No.
Assuming that Mr. Vela is right in his evidence, are you able to explain how, as a specialist subcontractor operating on major multi-million-pound cladding projects in London and the southeast of England, you weren't aware of any noises in the market about the desire to have separate classification reports for PE rivet and cassette, respectively?
As far as I'm aware, there were none.
Right. So when he says there were discussions in the wider market, and assuming you were part of that wider market, you're telling us that, as far as you know, there were no such discussions?
No.
Right. Can I then ask you to go to your statement? And I want to turn to the question of Class Naught and Rainer Bond ACM very specifically. If you look at page 6 of your statement, you'll see paragraph 24, and 3 lines up from the bottom of that paragraph, you say, excuse me, as I will detail further below, it came with a Class Naught rating, as indicated in the BBA certificate and the Rainer Bond literature. According to diagram 40 of approved document B, Class Naught is suitable for use on buildings over 18 metres. Now, was what you've written there something you knew at the time?
Yes.
Okay. So did you actually look at the BBA certificate for the Rainer Bond ACM when it was sent by Rainer Bond to Harley on the 23rd of April 2014?
I saw it, but it was a document I'd seen previously.
Yes, and you told us yesterday, I think, that you'd seen it when it was first published in 2008.
Yes.
Did you have cause to look at it between 2008 and April 2014?
Not to reread it, I knew it was on there.
Okay. Now, just to refresh your memory, I'll show you the document. It's CEP 50281, because this is where I get the date of the 23rd of April 2014 from. This is an email from Deborah French at Alcoa, Arconic, 23rd of April 2014, to Mark Harris, copy to Mike Albiston at Harley and Jeff Blades at CEP. And she attaches, among other documents, the BBA certificate 084510. And she says in the first line, "Hi Mark, as per your couple of emails, I've attached copies of our Rainer Bond BBA specimen warranty." I think you're telling us that even though that came into Harley on this date, you yourself didn't reread it or refresh your memory about it. Did you ever, after this date, have any cause to look at the BBA certificate?
No.
On the Grenfell Tower project?
No.
No. Had you, or did Mr. Harris or anybody else at Harley ever discuss the contents of the BBA certificate with you on this project?
No.
Did you ever discuss the contents of the BBA certificate with Mr. Soanes or anyone else at Studio E on this project?
No, I think Mark sent them the Rainer Bond BBA certificate.
Did you consider that it was Harley's responsibility to examine the certificates that you were given by manufacturers to make sure that you were satisfied, that Harley was satisfied that it was complying with its duties under the building regulations?
Yes, but we also have a duty to pass them on to the main contractor to pass on to the architect and building control.
When you first read the BBA certificate, did you yourself cross-check it with approved document B?
No.
To your knowledge, did anybody cross-check it with approved document B?
So, can you? It says it is Class O. How do you mean cross-check it with?
Well, did anybody put the two documents side by side and look at the certificate, look at approved document B, and read across from one to the other to make sure that the BBA certificate was saying something that made sense in the context of ADB?
I'm not sure anybody put them side by side, but if the product has to be Class O, and the BBA certificate said it's Class O, then we've checked it with ADB, surely.
So, in truth, is it right that, in fact, the only piece of information that you yourself considered in terms of fire performance for René Bond ACMPE was your belief that the panels achieved Class 0?
Yes.
And what did that tell you in relation to use on buildings over 18 metres?
They're suitable for cladding on buildings over 18 metres.
Now let's look at the certificate. You've exhibited this to your witness statement as RB13, Exhibit 13. Let's look at it. It's BBA 6047, please. And it's dated the 14th of January 2008, and here we can see the agreement certificate number 084510. So we know that it's the same document that Debbie French was attaching to her 23rd of April email. Let's just look at it. It says under Section 1, you see it says that it relates to René Bond architecture wall cladding panels, aluminium polyethylene composite panels used to provide a decorative stroke protective facade over external walls of buildings. And then it says under key factors assessed, it says in the third item down, behaviour in relation to fire. In relation to the building regulations for reaction to fire, the panels may be regarded as having a Class 0 surface in England and Wales and a low-risk material in Scotland. See Section 6. Now, I want to ask you about the expression Class 0 surface. What did you understand a Class 0 surface to mean?
That it's Class O, and that relates to the surface, but it's not of limited combustibility.
Did you understand that description applied to both the PE and the FR versions of ACM panels?
Yes.
Was it your understanding that, from this, that the ACM panels would be classed as the external surface for the purposes of approved document B?
Yes.
And therefore, being Class 0, it was suitable for buildings over 18 metres in any circumstances. Is that
Yes.
right?
Well, I wonder if you can help me a bit further on that, Mr. Bailey. This certificate is actually only speaking about the panels, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. And the language it uses is, speaking of the panel, it has a Class 0 surface. Does it say anything about the rest of the panel?
No, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't tell you anything about the core of the panel, does it?
No.
I'm going to take a slight detour for a moment or two from the certificate and ask you just to look at Appendix A of ADB. Can you please go to CLG 50224 and look at page 119? I'm going to come back to the certificate in just a moment, Mr. Bailey, so bear with me, but I just want to ask you this. This is Appendix A, Performance of Materials, Products and Structures, and there's a lengthy introduction in the first column that you'll see there. And if you look at the second column, the column on the right, there's Note 2. Do you see that? Mm-hmm. And it says, any test evidence used to substantiate the fire resistance rating of a construction should be carefully checked to ensure that it demonstrates compliance that is adequate and applicable to the intended use. Small differences in detail, such as fixing method, joints, dimensions, and the introduction of insulation materials, etc., may significantly affect the rating. Were you aware at the time of your involvement in the Grenfell Tower project of that note?
No.
Were you aware in principle of the idea, the concept, that note indicates?
So can you repeat that?
Well, even though you weren't aware of the note itself, my question was a more general one. Were you aware of the principle that any test evidence used to substantiate the fire resistance rating of a construction should be carefully checked?
No.
But it would follow, I think, therefore, that, well, tell me if this is right, that you and nobody else at Harley requested the test data relating to the Rainabond panels in order to interrogate the fire resistance rating.
Correct.
And the same applies in relation to Celetex and K15, I suppose. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Can I then go back to the BBA certificate, BBA 6047, please, at page 3. And I'd just like to look at paragraph 1.1. This is under the technical specification. And it says, the Rainabond architecture wall cladding panels comprise 2 half-millimetre thick aluminium alloy sheets bonded to either side of a core of low-density polyethylene. The panels are available either plain-edged, riveted system, or flanged, cassette system, to suit architectural requirements. See Figure 1. And just pausing there, you can see Figure 1 on the bottom of that page, Figure 1, and there's a pair of diagrams. And then it goes on, a Duragloss or PVDF coating available in various colours protects the exposed face. A polyester primer protects the unexposed face. The products are also available in a fire retardant grade, FR. And then there's something about thicknesses. Did you have any understanding about the differences between the PE and the FR core described there?
No.
Did you ever ask anybody on the Grenfell Tower project whether FR should be specified instead of PE? Or should be used instead of PE?
No.
Turning to PE, polyethylene, did you have any understanding at the time of what polyethylene actually was?
It was a plastic type core.
Did you have any understanding of its fire performance?
I think polyethylene actually has quite a high ignition point.
Well, at the time, did you have any understanding of its fire performance?
No, not particularly.
Was it common for Harley to use products on external wall constructions without understanding how those products would perform in a fire?
No, we actually have products which have been tested and supplied for that specific use. Exactly their chemical composition and how they're made is perhaps a little bit beyond us.
Did the reference to fire retardant panel in the BBA certificate not alert you to the fact that the standard product was not fire retardant?
The performance of the panels, if you go further in the certificate, is the only difference is one produces slightly more smoke than the other.
Was that your understanding at the time?
Yes.
Which produced slightly more smoke than the other?
The PE produces slightly more smoke than the FR.
So was it your understanding at the time that so far as fire performance is concerned, there was no difference between FR and PE?
Yes.
Where did you get that understanding from?
Because of the difference in, or the only difference in their fire performance. There's two. There's Class O, and there's the European standard is B S1 D0 for the FR, and B S2 D0 for the PE.
I see. So your understanding about smoke production was based entirely on the differences in those two standards?
Yes.
Which we'll come to in a moment. Did you ever seek any information from Deborah French about the fire retardant version of the product? Or did anyone at Harley?
No, I think when we saw the certificate back in 2008, there was a query, what's the difference between the two, which is why I knew the difference was the smoke. Whether that came from Deborah French or through some other route, I can't remember.
Can we look at page 5 of this document, section 6, under the heading Behaviour in Relation to Fire? And it says at 6.1, a standard sample of the product with a grey/green Duragloss 5000 coating, when tested for reaction to fire, achieved a classification of BS2D0 in accordance with EN 13501. What did you understand that to mean?
That is Class O, or equivalent to Class O.
Did you consider whether the finish that was on the product may have made a difference to its classification?
It's strange, it was a question that I asked at the time.
Who did you ask?
Believe it or not. I can't recall who asked, whether it was Renabon direct or through CEP. And if it was through CEP, it would have probably been Roy Fuster. And the reason for the question was the delamination we were having with the ethyl bond, and it was suggested that the paint on that may have had something to do with the delamination. So when I saw grey-green, does this only apply to this certificate? And they said, and I was told that no, it's on the certificate because that's the colour that was tested and it has to go on there. And does it apply to everything else? Well, yes, otherwise there'd be 200 of these certificates, one for each colour that they sell.
So that was the answer. You were told it made no difference.
Yes.
Who was it who told you that?
I believe that came back through Roy Fuster, although it's a long time, I can't remember who it was, but I think that's the route that it came back through.
Well, if you look at 6.4, it actually says these performances may not be achieved by other colours of the product, and designations of a particular colour should be confirmed in England and Wales by a test or assessment in accordance with approved document B, Appendix A, Clause 1. So I'm not quite sure how Mr. Fuster or anybody else could have given you the assurance you've just told us about in light of paragraph 6.4. Can you explain?
No.
So does it come to this, that you relied on what you were told about the colours rather than what the certificate actually said in black and white? At paragraph 6.4.
Yes.
Just to be clear, when was that? When was this assurance that you were given, you say?
2008.
The time when you first read the
Yes.
certificate. I see. Can I ask you to look at section 6.2, please? It says, a fire retardant sample of the product with a metallic grey PVDF finish, when tested in accordance with BS 4766, achieved a fire propagation index I of 0, and when tested in accordance with BS 4767, achieved a class 1 surface spread of flame. Now, on its face, the BBA certificate would appear to state that the only fire retardant sample had been tested in accordance with class 0. In other words, it actually passed those tests.
Yes.
Did you notice at the time that although the fire retardant sample had been tested, the PE, the standard, had not been tested in accordance with those tests?
No, it had been tested to the European standard, which is equivalent.
Did you notice that at the time when of your consideration of this certificate?
Yeah, I noticed that they were different, but they were both Class O, as it says on the front of the certificate.
Well, let me ask you this. Did you ever investigate with Arconic or Alcoa how the panels complied with diagram 40 of approved document B that you've referred to earlier?
Well, they comply with diagram B because it's BS2D0.
Did you ever ask her whether a standard sample of the product had actually been tested in accordance with BS 4766 and BS 4777?
No, I didn't.
Why is that?
Because it actually had a BS2DO rating, which is equivalent to Class O.
Right. Did you not consider that it might be safer to use the FR product rather than the standard PE version, given that only the FR product had passed a UK Class 0 test?
It didn't occur to me, and if it was significant, I would have expected Renabond to suggest that that's what we did.
So you would have relied on Renabond, in other words, Alcoa or Arconic, to make that suggestion rather than investigating it for yourself?
If they felt it was a significant thing, they would have. I would have expected them to have told us. But the PE product is Class O and complies with diagram 40.
Looking at paragraph 6.3, it says, as a consequence of sections 6.1 and 6.2, the products may be regarded as having a Class 0 surface in relation to the approved document B of the building regulations, etc. I don't think I need the rest. And it goes on to say at the end of that paragraph, the unexposed side of the product may also be regarded as having a Class 0 surface. What did you understand that statement to mean, the unexposed side?
Both sides,
In other words, the back as opposed to the front.
back as well as the front.
What about the edge?
Well, that's an interesting, as a composite, the whole product, if it has both surfaces are Class O, sorry, both surfaces are of limited combustibility, it'll be Class O. So the whole product is regarded as Class O. So, sorry, so that's an interesting question. I can't answer that.
Is it one you asked at the time?
No, the product, as far as we can tell, the product is Class O. By dint of it having a European classification, and the certificate says Class O on it, and we didn't actually, I think, consider whether the edge would have a different classification to the rest of the product.
Let's look at clause 6.3. It says, as a consequence of section 6.1 and 6.2, the products may be regarded as having a class 0 surface in relation to the approved document B. I've just read you that. I just remind you of it. But what did you understand by the phrase the products in that line? The products, plural, may be regarded as having a class 0 surface.
Renabond with a P or Renabond with an FR core. Right.
Now, given the diagram on page 2 of the certificate, let's just go back to that if we can. I'm sorry, it's figure 1. We looked at it briefly before. I just want to show it to you. This is the diagram on page 2. Figure 1, which shows the two systems.
Mm-hmm.
Did you study that diagram at the time?
Not in great detail. I mean, they're both standard type ACM fixing methods.
Did you draw any distinction in your mind between the rivet or face-fixed system and the cassette system when it came to the application of the Class 0 classification to the products?
No.
Why is that, given that the product or products are capable of being used in two different fixing systems?
Well, this certificate covers both of those systems.
That's how you read it, is it?
Yes.
Going back to paragraph 6.4 on page 5, please. We looked at this a moment ago. It says these performances may not be achieved by other colours of the product, and the designations of a particular colour should be confirmed by, I showed you this, a test in accordance with approved document B. We know that the finish that was tested, the finish of the product that was tested in the standard sample, the grey-green Duragloss 5000, wasn't the one that was chosen for Grenfell, was it?
No.
No. That was smoke silver in the end.
Correct.
Were any investigations made as to what differences in fire performance the different finish made?
No, other than the... sorry, let me just go back. On all the Renabond sales literature, there is no... It says clearly that the P panels and the FR panels achieve Class O. There is no distinction on any of their literature that it only applies to one colour of panel. The explanation I was given back in 2008 made sense to me, that if you're selling 104 colours in 3 different shades of finishing, you would therefore have to have 300 certificates. Therefore, the certificate covered whatever colour was selected.
So what did you make then of paragraph 6.4?
6.4 was it may not be achieved, and not that it won't, that it may not.
And doesn't that tell you that when you're selecting a colour or finish different from the grey-green Duragloss, you would have to check out whether or not it would be achieved?
It didn't. It didn't mean that to me. And again, if we are ordering panels from Renabond and the colour affects the fire performance, we would expect them. Well, first I wouldn't expect them to sell the panels. And if there was a problem, they would tell us. So I can't see how Renabond, the only colour they can sell into the market is grey-green.
But when it says the designations of a particular colour should be confirmed by a test in accordance with approved document B, when you read the certificate, who was it who would ask for that test to be carried out on the colour that was to be chosen if it wasn't grey-green?
It's never a point I considered. I mean, if you're asking me now, I presume we'd wait for the architect to pick the colour he wants, and then Renabond would have to do a test on it.
Did you ever go back to Arconic or Alcoa and seek any assurances as to the fire performance of the smoked silver that was eventually selected?
No, because of the conversation back in 2008, that it actually made no difference.
Notwithstanding the presence of 6.4?
No, accepted.
Right. Paragraph, Mr. Chairman, I'm still on the certificate. I've got a little bit of the way to go.
Might it make sense to break now? Is it going to destroy your
Well,
question?
it makes sense in one sense and makes no sense in another. It's an appropriate time given that we've been going for an hour and 25 minutes, but I'm in the middle of the certificate and it's a critical document on any view.
Yeah, yes, I'm not trying to hurry you through the
Yeah.
certificate at all.
Well, if we take a few
We'll take a
minutes
break
now.
now.
Yes, all right.
Mr. Bailey, we'll have a short break now.
Okay.
We'll come back at 20 to 12, please.
Okay.
And again, I have to ask you not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything to do with it. All right, when you're out of the room.
Okay.
Good, thank you very much. I'd like to go to the usher. Right, 20 to 12, please. Yes, would you ask Mr. Bailey to come back in, please? Thank you. Right, Mr. Bailey, ready to carry on? Yes. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bailey, just a question arising out of an exchange we had earlier on about the differences between FR and PE. The question is, did you ever ask Alcoa at Rainer Bond what the difference was between FR and PE?
No, only, I think, in 2008, it had probably been through Roy, but not directly, no.
Right. Were you not interested to know what the difference was?
Yeah, yes.
What were you told?
The difference between them was the amount of smoke that they generated in a fire.
Did you ever ask them which was better?
The FR produced slightly less smoke.
Right. Why would you have a PE if an FR produced less smoke?
That is a fair question, and looking at it now, I don't know why the PE product needed to exist.
No. And is that a question that occurred to you at the time?
They didn't know.
Just tell me a little further on that, Mr. Bailey. I mean, why would you prefer to use a non-fire retardant version in preference to a fire retardant version?
No, I don't think it was a question that we preferred to use it. That was the Renabond product.
Well, the Renabond, as I understand it, were offering two products. One was billed as being fire retardant, and so on the face of it, it would give you something that the ordinary PE version didn't give you, and something that would be, on the face of it, to be preferred.
I wouldn't disagree with you on that, but it was when we were doing the high-rise block at Camden, and we were Renabond were involved with that, and they said Renabond PE is fine, and at that point we didn't interrogate whether FR would have been a better product, or, how much more money it's. Looking back now, it would seem there was no point in producing PE for Renabond.
Well, that might depend on different applications, perhaps.
From what I've looked at, really, I can't see anything that PE can do that FR can't. And as it turned, as we found out now, the price differential between them is minimal.
All right. Thank you very much.
Just in that last answer, you told the chairman that Rainer Bond were involved with Camden, that's Chalcots, I think, and they said Rainer Bond PE is fine. Are you telling us that Rainer Bond confirmed to you that their own product at Chalcots was acceptable?
Yes, and they issued a warranty for all of those buildings.
Right, and you relied on Rainer Bond's say-so, did you?
On their say-so and their warranty.
Can we go back to the BBA certificate, which is still on, or should still be on the screen somewhere? Paragraph 6.5. That says, for resistance to fire, the performance of a wall incorporating the product can only be determined by tests from a suitably accredited laboratory and is not covered by this certificate. What did you understand that statement to mean?
It's the ability of the products to resist the fire from going one side of a wall to another.
Did the wording in there alert you to the fact that the fire performance of a wall incorporating the cladding in a different system could not be ascertained by reference to this certificate alone?
No.
Why is that?
I read that as resistance to fire, stopping the passage of fire from one side of a wall to another.
Can I ask you to look at paragraph 6.6 then, please? This is cavity barriers, and it says cavity barriers should be incorporated behind the cladding as required by the national building regulations, but should not block essential ventilation pathways. Particular attention should be paid to preventing the spread of fire from within a building breaching the cladding system through window and door openings. When you read this, what did you consider that statement to mean?
That we need to put cavity barriers in the cladding system.
And specifically around window openings?
Depending on the layout of the windows, yes.
Depending on the layout of the windows, what do you mean by that?
I think we're going back to the interpretation or the industry practice. If there's a single window contained within an opening, the compartmentalisation around the opening, or around the compartment, that means that the cavity barriers directly around the window may not be necessary. I think we've accepted previously that that's an error.
Do you agree that the BBA certificate for Reynobond, as we see here, itself recommends the inclusion of cavity barriers around the windows in order to prevent internal fire spreading?
We've accepted that.
Yeah. Can I ask you to look at section 10 then, please, on page 6? And let's just look at paragraph or section 10.2. This is under general. Installers must be trained and approved by the certificate holder, who can provide technical assistance at the design stage and at the start of installation. Now, would you accept that Harley, in the case of the Grenfell Tower project, was the certificate holder for this purpose?
Yes.
What steps did you take, or did you take any steps to ensure that Osborne Berry, as the installers, were appropriately trained?
Osborne Berry installed ACMs on a number of projects for us, so we've done training with them over the years.
On these panels, the installation of these panels?
The installation of these panels.
Right. I see. I may have misled you by suggesting that the certificate holder was Harley. If, as a matter of correct reading, the certificate holder was the person to whom the certificate was issued, that would mean that the installers would have to be trained and approved by Arconic. To your knowledge, were Osborne Berry ever trained and approved by Arconic?
No.
In your experience, generally in the industry, were cladding installers ever trained and approved by the person who had received a BBA certificate in respect of its product?
No.
I'm going to turn to a different topic. Can I ask you to look at RYD 30233468, please? Now, this is an email which people in this inquiry have called the Lachlan moment email. It's from Claire Williams of the TMO to Simon Lawrence on the 12th of November 2014, copied to Phil Booth at Artelia. And she says, Simon, I am just writing to get clarification on the fire retardants of the new cladding. I just had a Lachlan moment. And she then goes on to set out some excerpts which we believe are from the NBS specification. And there's a reference to the CWCT standard and a section from the GRC cladding. Now, you weren't copied in on this email, so we don't expect you to have seen it at the time, but do you recognise it?
It may be have been in a bundle of documents I've looked through.
I see. Now, Simon Lawrence, when he gave evidence, said that he would have forwarded Miss Williams's query to Harley. To your knowledge, Mr. Bailey, did he ever do so?
I can't recall.
Right. Now, Mr. Lawrence went on to say in his evidence, and perhaps I just should show it to you. It's day 24, please, page 163. And if you look at line 16, please, first of all, or we can see there's a passage there where he says the concern, she says, I'm so sorry, page 163, he says there was a design conversation going on in the background about whether GRC products could be substituted for Renabond or AN other. And there was a long conversation about whether stainless steel was acceptable, whether Renabond was acceptable, whether they had to stick with GRC products. Do you recall any such discussion about whether or not the GRC products proposed for the lower 4 floors of the building were suitable in terms of their fire performance?
No, I don't. GRC is glass reinforced concrete. Yeah, I don't, and GRC columns were provided at the lower floors.
Right. Do you recall any discussions with Ryden about whether GRC products could be substituted for Renabond?
No, if anything, it would have been the other way around.
What, can you just explain why that is?
Well, the GRC columns at ground floor level are big and heavy to get in, whereas the Renabond panels are light. So if there was going to be a change, it would have made sense to put ACM at the bottom rather than GRC for that reason. But typically, we'd put a heavier duty product at the base for impact resistance. So if people run into it, they don't damage it. So I'm not sure what that conversation was about.
But I think your evidence is you don't recall any such conversations yourself. Can you, and I don't want you to speculate, but are you able to help me with who at Harley would be the person to have had such conversations with Mr. Lawrence if they had taken place?
So what was the date of this email?
12th of November 2014.
So maybe I'm only speculating. Maybe Mark. I'm speculating Mark, possibly.
Mark Harris.
Harris, yeah.
I see. All right. I'd like then to turn to ask you some questions about the insulation. And let's start with Celetex. Can we first look, please, at your statement at page 28, paragraph 113. And here you say, the Celetex RS5000 PIR insulation was a relatively new product at the time of the project, and this was the first time that Harley had used it. As with the Reynobon ACM, it had been specified by the architects in the NBS specification document. Prior to this, Max Forder had also specified the use of Celetex, you say. And then you go on to say, over the page 29, about 6 lines down, the LABC certificate in relation to the Celetex RS5000 confirmed that it had been assessed by the BRE. I'm so sorry, I should have read on. I'm so sorry. Top of the page. The Celetex marketing material, first of all, the Celetex marketing material stated clearly that it was suitable for buildings above 18 metres in height. One of its selling points was that it was the first PIR insulation board to successfully test to BS 8414 and meet the criteria set out in BR 135, and was therefore acceptable for use in buildings above 18 metres in height. And then you, I think, exhibit the LABC certificate in relation to that product. I've just read that bit. Now, you say in numerous points in your statement, as well as this, that the architects specified RS5000. In fact, in the NBS specification actually specified FR5000, didn't it?
It did.
Yeah. Now, as far as you were aware, was RS5000 a new product, or did you think that it was an old material or product, FR5000, simply rebranded and launched as a new product?
No, we thought it was a new product.
You thought it was a new product?
Yes.
Why did you think that?
Because of the marketing, that it was RS 5000.
Right. Now, let's look at your statement at page 8 then, if we can, and go to paragraph 31. You say there, that in the last sentence, Celetex informed us that the relevant product was in fact the RS rain screen product rather than the FR flat roof product which had been specified. Do you know when Celetex told you, or Harley, that the relevant product was in fact the RS rain screen rather than the FR which had been specified?
I'm guessing, but I would imagine it would have been towards the end of 2014.
At that stage, did you raise any queries as to whether the change was significant?
Sorry, in what respect?
Or did you ask Celetex whether this was actually a change of product or just a change of name?
No, I didn't actually deal with this personally, so I'm speculating a little bit. But they told us this was the product for rain screen as opposed to the FR for flat roof.
Given your answer earlier that you thought it was a new product, did you raise any queries as to whether did you ask them whether there were any differences?
I didn't speak to them.
No, but did anybody at Harley ask them whether there were any differences?
Daniel's dealing with them, so he may well have asked them. I don't know.
Right. Do you know whether he asked them whether the change from FR to RS was significant in any way?
I don't know.
Right. As a new product, at least as you thought it was, do you agree that Harley should have satisfied itself that it had been appropriately selected for use at Grenfell Tower?
Yes, but we also put it back up the chain to the architect and the specifiers.
I think the answer is you say yes, and we put it back up the chain. You say to the architect and the specifiers. Who were the specifiers?
Oh, sorry, wrong word. The architect who would then pass it through to the rest of the professional team.
Who was that?
That would. I am suggesting that would be Exova and Max Fordham.
To your knowledge, are you recalling that there was a discussion between Studio E and Exova about RS 5000?
Not specifically. Exova were the fire specialists, so if we're changing a product, or we're suggesting a change of product, that would be who the architect would talk to.
Well, is that an assumption you're making now, or are you recalling actual conversations that you knew about at the time?
It's an assumption I'm making now,
Right.
but that would be the normal course of events.
Right. Now, do you accept, just to press the point a bit more, that Harley should have satisfied itself that given that it thought it was a new product, that it was safe to use at Grenfell Tower?
Yes, and as far as Harley are concerned, we carried out the all possible reasonable investigations on it, primarily talking to the manufacturers who produced the product. We've sent them a series of drawings showing its application and the products it's being used with for them to confirm that they're happy with it.
Well, let's just examine that a little bit in a little bit more detail, if we can. Can you go back to paragraph 113 of your statement, please, on page 29? Just want to follow that through. About 7 lines up from the bottom of that paragraph, you say there, in addition, a representative of Celetex, Jonathan Room, also attended Harley's offices to talk with Harley staff about the benefits of RS 5000 product, specifically for the Grenfell project. Do you recall why such a meeting took place?
I think that Jonathan was called in specifically to talk about the use of Celetex at Grenfell. And it may have been at that meeting that Daniel gave him drawings to take away, but I wasn't at it, I can't.
Do you know who called Jonathan Room in?
I don't. I suspect it was Daniel,
Right.
but I might be wrong.
And why did he call him in? Do you know?
Because this was a new product, we want to assure ourselves that it was safe. And I did see an email from Daniel to Celetex saying, you need to convince us that this stuff is as good as Rockwall or we won't be using it.
Do you know why it was Jonathan Room who attended Harley's offices, as you say, rather than Studio E or Ryden, in order to discuss the proposed use of RS 5000?
Because we were trying to satisfy ourselves that the product, as far as we were, that the use of Celetex was suitable for the project.
Can we look at CEL 409973, please? Now, this is a Celetex Salesforce entry. And if we look at page 2, we can see that next to a meeting on the 24th of November 2014, your name is mentioned.
Where's that?
Well, it's about 2/3 of the way down the page. It may need to be expanded a little bit more. But looking at what's on the screen at the moment, we can see about 2/3 of the way down the screen.
Yes.
If you look at the meeting identity, rain screen contractor Ray Bailey, and then reading across to the very far right-hand column, 24th of November 2014. Do you see that?
I do.
Yes. Were you present at a meeting as identified here, with Jonathan Room on the 24th of November 2014?
I don't think it was. I may have met Jonathan when he was in the office, but I don't recall sitting down to a meeting with him.
Now, I know this is not your document, and we will investigate it with others, but I just want to try and get your recollection. Looking at this document, it may be that the meeting was about Premier House, because we can see that the entry above it, Mike Albiston, is next to something to do with Premier House, and that's also the 24th of November.
All those are the same date, aren't they?
They were the same date as is entered. There seems to have been a meeting between with Mark Harris, Premier Inn T4 Heathrow, Mike Albiston, Premier House, and Ray Bailey, no entry, all on the 24th of November.
It may be just we know Jonathan. He's worked for a number of companies, and it may be. I stopped and said hello to him, so I don't know quite what that meeting was about.
Do you remember having a meeting with Jonathan Room about this time yourself?
No, I don't mean having a meeting with Jonathan. I met a chat. I don't recall actually having a meeting with him, but I'm not saying that I wasn't there on that day.
Do you remember having a meeting with anybody else at Celetex on or about the 24th of November 2000?
The only person that we had contact with from Celetex, as far as I'm aware, is Jonathan.
I see. Can I then ask you to look at CEL 6018? This is an email from Jonathan Room at Celetex to Daniel Anketell-Jones at Harley, dated the same day, 24th of November 2014, as you can see. Hi, Dan. I spoke with Mark and the team regarding a few projects. You can see the Premier projects are set out there, as well as another one, Chartwell House, Southend. The first one is Grenfell Tower, as you can see, and he says, under the heading Grenfell Tower, when we last looked at this, we came to a conclusion of using 3,000 square metres of 150mm RS 5000. Is this still so? Mark's drawings were showing a mix of 100mm and 160mm. Does this prompt a recollection about a discussion between Harley and Celetex at that time?
No, it doesn't, but they clearly, Mark, I suspect that's Mark's state because it's talking about drawings. But they were chatting about various projects that may or may not happen.
Did Mr. Room, to your recollection, give any assurances to you or to anybody else at Harley about about the suitability of Celetex RS 5000 on high-rise buildings?
Yes.
What were those What were those assurances?
That it was perfectly safe and the product for the job.
Did he say that to you in a conversation?
No, not to me.
Did he say that to anybody else in a conversation? To your knowledge?
The conversation with regard to the suitability of this, I think, would have with Daniel, and he certainly have assured him, otherwise he wouldn't have put it on the job.
Right. What I'm seeking really to establish is whether or not, apart from what was on the certificate, Harley had any conversations with Celetex in which Celetex gave assurances as to the suitability of this material on high-rise buildings.
Yes, but I wasn't present.
I see. Did, to your knowledge, and if you weren't present, you weren't present, but to your knowledge, did anybody at Harley discuss the fire performance of RS 5000 with Mr. Room, either on this occasion or any other?
Yeah, I think that was the intention of Daniel's first email when he was talking about he needs to be convinced of it, otherwise we'll be going with Rockwell.
So you think that Daniel Anketell-Jones wanted to be convinced that it was safe? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
From a fire safety perspective?
Yes.
Otherwise you wouldn't use it and would go with Rockwell? You say you think that. What leads you to think that?
I've seen an email.
Okay. Can you help us any further with that, or is this something we should be asking Mr. Anketell-Jones?
I'd ask Daniel. That's yeah.
All right. Now, Mr. Room goes on, as we can see in this email, to give the measurements in respect of the product for the tower and asks, is this still so? Is it fair to say that the decision to use RS 5000 had been made by this point, 24th of November 2014?
Yes, I would. So I would imagine so, but I'm not 100% certain of the timeline on this.
Who would have made the decision to use RS 5000?
The decision to use the Celetex was part of the specification that we came down, so that was handed down to us. So unless there was a good reason to change it, the decision was made by the architect back in. I'm getting losing track of the years.
Well, just let me help you. The original decision, of course, was made in 2012, but that was FR 5000.
Yes.
Let me be a bit more precise with my question. Who made the decision to use RS 5000 as opposed to FR 5000?
The architect.
You know that, do you?
Well, yeah. We've pointed out that there's a difference, and this is one to be used. It has to be signed off for us to use it.
I see. Who at Harley made? Did anybody at Harley make the decision that RS 5000 should be used?
The Celetex said this is the product you need to use. We've passed it up the line to the architect. They've signed it off, so we've used it.
Who was it who passed it up to the architect to sign off?
It would have been Daniel or maybe Ben.
Are you aware of any discussions between Daniel or Ben, but on the one hand, and the architect on the other, about whether or not RS 5000 should be used?
No, I can't recall.
Right. And when you say the architect, obviously Studio E, who at Studio E would have, as you say, signed off on the use of RS 5000?
Since I wasn't part of the conversation, I can't tell, but I suspect it would have been Neil Crawford.
Now, I just want to show you something in Neil Crawford's evidence on that point. Can you please go to day 10, page 46? If you go to page 46, he says at line 13, do I recall the period when it was specified? And this is in the context of earlier questions about RS 5000 in place of FR 5000. And he says at line 15, yes, it was forwarded to me, I think, by Ray Harley, 17th, 18th September, thereabouts, I think 2014. Question, what makes you recall that so specifically? Because we were having a conversation, I think they had raised their RFI1 in relation to the cavity barrier strategy. Now, do you recall a conversation with Mr. Crawford on 17th or 18th of September 2014 or thereabouts about changing from FR 5000 to RS 5000?
No.
At the time of the change, did anybody at Harley, to your knowledge, consider how RS 5000 met the requirements of approved document B?
I think we've discussed this earlier.
remind me, in summary.
In summary, we sent the details and the information to Celetex to make sure that they were satisfied that it complied with their, effectively, their 8414 certificate, and because we changed the panel on the front, that it was safe to use it. So effectively, they would have been doing a desktop study on it.
Right. Did you ask them or make any assessment of whether or not RS5000 was a material of limited combustibility?
I didn't know.
Did anybody at Harley?
I don't know.
Did anybody at Harley check what system RS5000 had been tested in as part of its 8414 test and certification?
I think that was the reason for sending them our details, to get them to get Celetex to compare them and confirm that with their study that it complied. Did
you think there was a, you mentioned the word desktop a moment ago, did you think there was a desktop study in relation to
I thought there was
RS5000?
Perhaps desktop study is not the right, there was an assessment carried out by Celetex on our system compared to their 8414 test.
Did you ask for the BBA certificate in relation to RS5000?
I'm sure I didn't, but I'm sure we had one from them.
All right. Did you consider how Raynor-Bond PE would interact with RS5000 in terms of fire safety?
That's the reason we sent the details to Celetex to assess that.
I see. Does that tell us that you were alive to the risks of using RS5000 with Raynor-Bond PE ACM?
No, we need to ensure that the product we put with it, whether it be because it's something different to what they use in the test, we need them to assess that it is still relevant.
You say there was an assessment carried out by Celetex. What was that assessment?
I don't know.
Did you ever ask for it?
I didn't. Again, Dan was dealing with this.
Did Dan ever ask for it?
I don't know.
Well, we have to ask him, I suppose. Right, okay. Let's look at the brochures in respect of RS5000. You, I think, exhibit at RB52 the Celetex Rain Screen Cladding Specification Guide. That's CEL 6013. Let's just start with that. Is this document familiar to you? It should be, because you've exhibited it.
It is.
Right. Was it? Did you read that document at the time?
No, the one I read at the time was the sales brochure.
Right. If you didn't read it at the time, why did you exhibit it?
I think there may be there may be been the wrong one that was put in there.
Oh, right. Well, let's look at it and see how we go. Can you look at page 5, please? Fire performance, left-hand side, and there's a big set of words between two purple lines. Celetex RS5000 has been successfully tested to BS 8414 2005 fire performance of external cladding systems, and then it says under rain screen insulation, Celetex RS 5000 is Class 0 fire rated as described by the National Building Regulations, having achieved both a pass to BS 476 Part 6 and classification as Class 1 in accordance with BS 476 Part 7. You see that?
Yes.
Does this ring a bell with you?
Yes, the document I was actually should have been included, the wrong one. It was the sales brochure, but just carry on with this. I've read this since.
So you have read this?
Yes.
I see. So at the time, did this confirm to you that the RS 5000 product was Class 0?
Yes. Well, I said I read this subsequent to.
Subsequent to?
Sorry, this is the wasn't the document that should have been included, a different one. But carry on with this.
Well, all right. Well, I don't want to ask you questions on a false basis, but I mean, assuming you had read it at the time,
yes.
Do we take it from your answers earlier on that that you understood from the reference to Class 0 that meant that it was a material of limited combustibility?
It's more clear in here that this relates to Part 6 and Part 7.
Well, you say more clear.
Well, on the sales brochure, it referred to it as being Class O throughout. And this is relates to Class O, Part 6 and 7.
Now, I just read you the part on the left-hand side where it says RS 5000 has been successfully tested to BS 8414.
Yeah.
And it then says the same thing underneath building above 18 metres.
Yes.
And it then goes on to say at the end of that first paragraph, meets the criteria set out in BR 135 and is therefore acceptable for use in buildings above 18 metres in height. Assuming, I'm not sure about this, that you read this at the time, what did you or would you have taken from that?
That it was suitable for buildings above 18 metres in height.
Including Grenfell.
Including Grenfell.
Did you notice that the sheet also set out the system within which the insulation had passed the 8414 test? It's set out just below that.
Yes. Yes.
Let's look at it together. The system tested to BS 8414 was as follows: 12mm fibre cement panels, supporting aluminium brackets and vertical rails, 100mm Celetex RS 5000, 12mm non-combustible sheathing board, 12mm SFS system, and 2 times 12.5mm plasterboard. Was it clear to you at the time that the system was different from the system proposed for use at Grenfell Tower?
With regard to the face panel, yes, it was. The backing wall here is this, because this is a BS 8414 Part 2 test, is a SFS backing wall, which is the 12mm non-combustible sheathing, 10mm SFS, and the 2 skins of plasterboard. At Grenfell, we actually had a 100mm thick concrete wall, which would have been an 8414 Part 1 test. So in terms of the cladding element, the difference was the fibre panel cement on the front.
Yes.
Which is why if you read on, it says if there's a change to it, it needs to be considered, which is why the details were sent to Celetex.
Indeed. Did you notice that at the time? Just to be clear, so that other people listening to this will understand what you're talking about. Let's look together at the right-hand column, third paragraph down. The fire performance and classification report for Celetex RS 5000 only relates to the components detailed above. Any changes to the components listed will need to be considered by the building designer. And I think what you're telling us in the last composite answer was that you noticed that at the time.
I think Daniel picked that up.
I see. And to your knowledge, were the changes to the components listed considered by the building designer?
I am as assuming that the building designer being the architect, but we sent the details to Celetex to have them assess it as well.
When you say the building designer was the architect, did you send the details and requests to to Studio E to ask them to assess whether or not the differences between the system tested by Celetex and that to be applied at Grenfell were satisfactory from a fire safety point of view?
We sent them the RS 5000 details, and they have and they had, in fact, their cladding details.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure that's an answer to my question. Did you send the details and the request to Studio E to ask them to make an assessment about whether or not the differences between the cladding system to be used at Grenfell and the cladding system used in the 8414 test by Celetex made a difference from a fire safety point of view?
I don't think we specifically did, no.
Did Daniel Alkitel-Jones or anybody else at Harley, assuming for the moment them to be the building designer, make any such assessment?
Our assessment on this would have been through Celetex.
So again, you were content to rely on what the manufacturer was telling you rather than making an independent assessment of those differences, either yourself or with other professionals engaged on the project.
We're not fire experts, and that's why we asked Celetex and the manufacturers for their input on it.
Well, you say we're not fire experts. You are cladding experts. And although there may be a debate about whether you're the building designer, Celetex are clearly saying here, are they not, that any changes to the components should be considered by the building designer. They're not inviting questions to them. That's right, isn't it? It was the building designer's job to get to the bottom of what differences the changes made. Okay?
It doesn't. That seems to be what they're saying, but not how they acted.
Can we look at a different document, slightly different document? This is the Rain Screen Cladding Compliance Guide, which is CEL 6012. And I'd like, first of all, just to ask you whether this is a document you're familiar with.
I've seen this.
Yes. Had you seen it at the time?
No.
Right. Well, let's see how we go with that. Can I ask you to look at page 3? It's a similar point, but look at page 3, right-hand column. It set out the performance criteria in some detail, BR135, and then the performance criteria of that, with some diagrams beneath that. And then it says in the right-hand column, at the top of the page, the performance of the system under investigation is evaluated against 3 criteria: external fire spread, internal fire spread, and mechanical performance. And then it says, the classification applies only to the system as tested and detailed in the classification report. The classification report can only cover the details of the system as tested. It cannot state what is not covered. When specifying or checking a system, it is important to check that the classification documents cover the end-use application. Did you know that at the time of the selection of RS 5000?
Yes.
Can you look at page 4, please? This is a depiction in a drawing, it's figure 4, of the system as tested. for the purposes of the 8414 test that Celetex are saying they carried out for this product. And you can see there what the composite elements of the test were. You've got a helping hand bracket, and then on the outside you've got a 12 millimeter Marley Eternit Natura panel. That's different, isn't it, from Renault Bond PE55 ACM?
It is.
And then you've got below that a 12 millimeter magnesium oxide board. That's different from the substrate that you had at Grenfell, isn't it?
We had 100 mil of concrete as opposed to 12 mil of magnesium oxide board.
And then you also had 100 on the test, 100 millimeters of LSF system. What's that? Do you know?
LSF.
Do you know what that is?
Might be lightweight steel frame.
Right. Again, different from Grenfell, yes?
Can you roll the diagram up a little?
Oh, I'm so sorry. You're quite right. Can you see it there?
Yes. So the lightweight steel frame and the magnesium oxide board are the backing wall in this system,
Yeah.
compared to 100 mil thick concrete at Grenfell.
Yeah. So different.
Different, but
Yeah.
Grenfell's far better than that in terms of
Oh, I understand that. I understand what you're saying, but different. And then underneath that, aluminium 60 by 40 by 2 continuous rail, and then underneath that, the Celetex. Now, you refer to paragraph 113 of your statement. If we could just go back to that, to the LABC certificate and the BRE assessment. If we just look at that very briefly. It's page 29, paragraph 113. I touched on this earlier when I read this part of the paragraph to you. You can see that it says 7 lines down, the LABC certificate in relation to the Celetex RS5000 confirmed that it had been assessed by the BRE, Building Research Establishment, and complied with BR 135 for use in rain screen walls above 18 metres. You see that?
Yes.
Did you look at the LABC certificate at the time?
No.
Did you look at any documents demonstrating the assessment by the BRE at the time?
Not personally, no.
You see, you referred to it in your statement, and I confess that I had thought that that was something that you were speaking to at the time. So do we read your statement here as something that you came to know afterwards?
No, the LABC, all the statements there were on the front page of their sales literature, which is the document I was referring to.
Let's look at the certificate. But before I go to that with you, does that tell us that although you noticed it in the sales literature, you didn't actually look at the certificate itself?
Correct.
Right. Did anybody at Harley actually look at the LABC certificate and the BRE assessment itself?
I can't say for sure, but if it would have been Daniel if we did indeed look at it.
Okay. Well, let's look at the BRE classification report first of all. This is for RS5000. This is at CEL 6011, page. That first page is the first page, and I'd like to look at page 4 with you. But let's look at the first page. Is this document familiar to you?
I can't recall. As you go through it, I may recognise.
All right. Well, this is dated the 11th of August 2014. And it's issue 2, it appears, produced by the BRE. And if we go to page 4, section 5.3, I want to focus on that with you. It says under 5.3, field of application, I should just perhaps show you 5.2, first of all, although it's only a sentence. The system described in this classification report has been tested and met the performance criteria set out in Annex B of BR 135. And then the field of application under 5.3 says this classification is valid only for the system as installed and detailed in Section 2 of this classification report and the associated details found in the related test reports referenced in Section 4. Did you know that the BRE classification report for RS 5000 was valid only for the system as installed and detailed in Section 2 of the report itself, and not otherwise?
That seems to be a repeat of the clause that was in the installation manual
Yes.
later.
So taking the product literature and this certificate, do you accept that they don't say that any cladding system configuration incorporating RS 5000 would be covered by the BS 8414 fire performance and classification report?
Which is why we asked Celetex to confirm that we could use the product, effectively getting them to do an assessment of it.
Well, I'll take that as a yes, unless you
Okay.
tell me I shouldn't. Is that a yes?
Sorry, can you repeat the...
Well, yes. Do you accept that neither the sales literature, which we've looked at, or the certificate say that any cladding system configuration which incorporated RS 5000 would be covered by the BS 8414 test as having met the relevant criteria in BR 135?
If it's a yes or no answer, yes.
Now, would it follow from that that had Harley, perhaps you, taken the trouble to familiarise yourself thoroughly with the sales literature and the certificates, you or others at Harley would have realised that it could only be used, RS 5000 could only be used in a cladding system which was exactly the same as the system tested, which gave rise to the certification under 8414.
That's why we investigated the product with Celetex to go through this to ensure that it was compliant.
But even though the system was different, as we've accepted, and even though the sales literature and the certificate say that the 8414 test wouldn't cover a different system, what is it that Celetex said to Harley that led Harley to believe that it was covered?
Well, they said it was safe and acceptable to use it with in the configuration that we had. If they told us it wasn't safe and acceptable, it would not be on the building.
They said it was safe and acceptable to use, you say. Did anybody undertake any independent verification of that assurance, or did you just take it on trust from Celetex?
Celetex are a major insulation manufacturer. They're a huge corporation. We do not expect to be misled by them. So, yeah, we trusted what they told us.
Even though they had a vested interest in making sure you bought the product because they were making it and selling it.
Yeah, why, how, why would they lie to us?
Well, that is a question to which there may be a number of answers, but I'm afraid not equipped
No.
to answer them.
Mr. Bailey, just help me with this. You referred to the exercise that you asked Celetex to carry out, I think at an earlier stage, as a desktop study, which is shorthand for
An assessment.
an assessment. All right.
Yes.
Did they provide you with any detailed analysis to explain why they came to the conclusion that it was an acceptable use?
I haven't seen it, so I don't know what they gave to Daniel.
You would normally, I suppose, expect a desktop assessment to be based on some form of analysis of the product actually used and comparing them with the materials used in the test, wouldn't you?
Correct. Yes.
But you don't know whether any such analysis was supplied.
I don't know what that analysis was supplied.
Thank you.
Now, in paragraph 113, you also refer to the LABC certificate, as we've seen. We don't need to go back to it. Can we look at the certificate? This is at CEL 50539. And we can see, well, there it is. Again, just to be clear with you, is that a document you ever saw at the time, do you think?
I'm not sure I saw it at the time.
Right. We can see from the bottom of the page that it was issued first on the 21st of August 2014 and had a 3-year validity life.
Okay.
And this one is issued, this particular version issued on the 19th of August 2016. And it covers RS 5000 insulation board, but then there's a description of the product there on the first page. And it says, this is an assessment of a PIR insulation board by Celetex designed for use within rain screen construction. And then it goes on to say, towards the bottom of that paragraph, it has been assessed by the BRE and complies with BR 135 for use in rain screen applications above 18 metres in height, subject to the board being fixed to a non-combustible substrate. See conditions of certificate for more information. Can we then look at the second page of the certificate? That says under the scope of registration, under the 6 lines down, Celetex RS 5000 has been successfully tested to BS 8414, meets the criteria set out in BR 135, and therefore is acceptable for use in buildings with stories above 18 metres in height, subject to matching the specification criteria of the BRE classification report carried out as an alternative compliance to ADB. You see that?
Yes.
And then under conditions of certificate, it says, reading from the 8th line down, for use on buildings with a floor. Do you see that? For use on buildings with a floor more than 18 metres above ground level, Celetex RS 5000 has been successfully tested to BS 8414 Part 2 and meets the criteria set out in Annex B of BR 135. This classification is only valid for the system specification and detailing outlined in Section 2 of the BRE classification report, including the associated details found in Section 4 test reports as an alternative compliance to ADB. A full copy of the report should be made available by Celetex. And it goes on to particularise the details of the build-up of the test. And again, would you agree that the LABC certificate, although you didn't, I think, see it at the time, sets out quite clearly the exact system which the RS 5000 was said to have passed?
Yes.
And that was different from Grenfell, I think we've established. And again, this certificate makes clear in a number of places that the classification related only to the system that was tested.
Yes.
Yes. And therefore, just reading the certificate, do you accept that it couldn't be read or can't be read or shouldn't have been read as permitting the use of RS 5000 in buildings over 18 metres in all circumstances, whatever the build-up of the cladding system?
Reading that, I accept that it shouldn't have been.
Can you look at page 3, please, of this document? It's got a section, as we can see, headed the Building Regulations 2010 as amended England and Wales. And under note, you see, sorry, under ADB, fire safety note, you can see the second note down. It says, thermosetting insulants, rigid polyurethane foam boards do not meet the limited combustibility requirements of AD 82 tables A7, and so should not be accepted as meeting AD 82 paragraph 12.7. Did you know that at the time? Did you know that the certificate was making it crystal clear that RS 5000 was not a material of limited combustibility?
No.
Had you read this certificate, you would have done, wouldn't you?
Yes, it would have been at complete odds with the Class O throughout statement that was put on their advertising.
Well, you say at complete odds. You say at complete odds in accordance with your understanding at the time of what Class 0 meant.
Well, Class O throughout, yes.
Well, that's your understanding. We've been through that this
Yes, we
morning.
have.
I see that. And it's clear, I would suggest to you from this, that the only reason it could be used above 18 metres is if it was included as part of a system tested to BR 135 and BS 8414 using exactly the same elements in the system.
Yes, it would mean that there's only one configuration or panel that Celetex can be used for anywhere in the... So there's no other products that could be used with it, is really what it's saying. And as an insulation product being sold all over the UK for use on high-rise blocks, that it makes no logical sense.
Just summarising it, leaving aside what you say Celetex told Harley,
Yes.
if RS 5000 was not, let me try it again. If you'd read this certificate and read the BRE report on which it was based, you would have realised, first of all, that RS 5000 was not a material of limited combustibility, correct?
Yes.
And you would have realised that because the system to be applied at Grenfell was different from the components of the system, the subject of the BS 8414 test, that the fact that the BS 8414 test had been passed did not mean that you could use it at Grenfell.
Unless there was an assessment on it, yes.
And you can't put your finger on a separate individual assessment, can you?
I can't.
Thank you. I'm now going to turn to Kingspan K15. Can I ask you to go, please, to paragraph 114 of your witness statement, which is at page 29. And you say there, a small amount of Kingspan Coolfoam K15 was used in place of the Celetex. The reason for this was that SIG plc, the suppliers, had sold the allocation intended for Grenfell Tower to another customer. SIG offered to supply Harley with the Kingspan Coolfoam K15 as a substitute to help keep the project progressing. Kingspan Coolfoam K15 is described in its BBA certificate as being class 0. Whilst the test in approved document B, paragraph 12.7, is one of limited combustibility, it was assumed that as the product was described as class 0 in respect of behaviour in relation to fire, it was compliant with paragraph 12.7 and suitable for buildings over 18 metres. First of all, I'll come back to class 0 in a moment, but first of all, do you know where on the building K15 was used, even roughly?
No, I don't. But there are long-range photographs of the building in construction with the Kingspan logo on it, so it would be possible to locate it.
Right. Well, we may come back to that, but you say here that the Kingspan's Coolfoam K15 is described in its BBA certificate as having a class 0 rating. Did you actually read the Kingspan K15 BBA certificate at the time?
No, as I explained earlier, the Cooltherm K15 had been signed off some years ago, and therefore we used it on other projects. And so when there was some K15 to go on here, it was signed off by our technical guys.
So what, signed off for all projects?
K15, going back to the initial use of it in 2010, 2011, is becoming an industry standard insulation project on tall buildings. It was regarded, other than Rockwool, as the only other product you could use on high-rise buildings, and then subsequently Celetex have moved into the market, and with the problems that we currently sat here looking at.
Now, Kingspan Cooltherm K15 wasn't specified in any of the specification documents for this
No, it
project.
wasn't.
Can you think of any reason why it was that when it was substituted on one or two occasions, in fact, I think, for Celetex RS5000, nobody at Harley thought to double check the certification?
I think it's because it's been checked previously on previous projects.
But you would have realised that in order to ensure its safety for use above 18 metres, it would either have to be a material of limited combustibility or have passed an 8414 test, or there'd be a desktop study in relation to it. Did anybody at Harley, to your knowledge, actually address their mind to what route to compliance the Cooltherm would take?
No, they addressed their mind to it, as I say, some years ago. So on this particular, I don't know quite what was done when this small amount of Kingspan was substituted.
But when it was signed off by your technical guys, as you say earlier in your answers just now, it wasn't signed off, as I think you said, for all projects, or was it?
Well, yes, initially it was signed off for use pretty much on all projects.
Regardless of whether the clad was above 18 metres or not?
Yes.
Without any reference or qualification about limited combustibility or 8414 or any other route to compliance?
It was signed off by then technical management. Since then, we've used it.
Is there a document under which we can see this sign-off?
No, but we've got a number of tenders with this product referenced in.
Well, that may be. Is there an internal document at Harley to which anybody engaged on any project could look at when confronted with K15 just to double-check that it was safe to use on a high-rise building? In other words, a building above 18 metres?
I don't think there's a specific document for that, no.
So how would, for example, Daniel Ankle-Jones, who I think wasn't there in 2009, or anybody else who wanted to know whether K15 was safe, how would they know?
I think Daniel was there in 2009, but not in that role.
All right. But how would anybody at Harley, or and any independent contractor of Harley brought in to assist with the design, how would anybody know whether K15 was safe unless there was something they could go to tell them?
I think it's historic data.
Historical detail held by whom?
On details on previous projects.
So in people's heads?
No, there's on projects which we completed, we have O&M manuals and product data from those projects.
Okay. Does that explain why nobody at Harley requested a copy of the BBA certificate for Kingspan when it was suggested by SIG as a substitute product?
Yes, we had a copy of the BBA certificate, which is a 2008 copy.
Can we go to the BBA certificate? It's at KIN 50454. This is a second issue of this certificate dated 2013. Do you accept, I mean, it's common sense, but do you accept that if anybody did want to see the BBA certificate for Kingspan Cooltherm K15, this is what they would have got?
After 2013, yes.
Indeed. 17th of December 2013. And you can see that it says under key factors assessed, behaviour in relation to fire. The product will not contribute to the development stages of a fire or present a smoke or toxic hazard. See Section 8. Now, Section 8 is on page 5.1. Let's just look at that. Sorry, page 5, I'm sorry. Let's just look at that. And let's look at Section 8.1 at the bottom of page 5. Behaviour in relation to fire. The product is classified as Class 0 or low risk, as defined in the documents supporting the National Building Regulations. Right. It doesn't say Class 0 throughout, does it?
No, the Class 0 throughout moniker was a Celetex advertising phrase.
But do you accept that on this product, the fact that it was Class 0 did not mean that it was a product of limited combustibility?
And I accept that.
Right. Did anybody at Harley ever investigate whether there was any test evidence which showed that Cooltherm K15 met the definition of limited combustibility?
Not in 2014, no. So I don't know exactly what was done in 2009.
We can look at this document in total, but take it from me that there is no reference in it to limited combustibility at all. Can you comment?
No, I accept that.
Right. Now, we looked yesterday at the Curtin's structural performance specification, which formed part of your contract with Ryden, and in particular, clause 7.1.14, which related to fire hazards if the insulant was exposed. Given the contractual obligations we looked at yesterday in some detail, Mr. Bailey, do you accept that in order to comply with them, Harley should have made further investigations in respect of the combustibility of K15 before ordering it and applying it to the building?
Yes, I think there should have been a check on it, yes.
Yes. And if we turn the page on this certificate, just before we finish off, before the lunch break, it refers to the BS 8414 test under paragraph 8.2 at the top there, and it shows what the specific cladding construction was, which met the criteria in BR 135. And again, just casting your eye down those elements, it's clear that they were different, again, from the elements making up the cladding system at Grenfell.
Yes.
And so again, that means that K15 was neither a material of limited combustibility nor reliable as a route to compliance on the basis of a successful pass of an 8414 test.
Correct.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment?
I think it is, yes. Thank you very much. We'll have a break now, Mr. Bailey. We'll resume at 2:00. And again, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything related to it while you're out. All right?
Okay.
Thanks so much. You go with the usher then, please. Thank you. 2:00 then, please. Thank you.